Hi, Amy.
Hi, Jill. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Am I supposed to be on screen or not?
Yes, we would prefer. It's
Okay,
we're trying to make these kind of small and intimate with only 10 of us, so
okay,
screens is going to be a little bit better. And so I imagine people will be
great.
joining here momentarily, but
Okay. Oh, I'm
we'll give
I'm
everybody.
first.
You're first, yeah.
Oh my
So we'll give.
goodness,
Sorry for the pressure.
that is unreal. Quick,
Doesn't
tell
often happen,
everybody.
huh?
It's pretty rare.
You're
Pretty
Northern
rare.
California, is that right?
I am, yeah.
Okay, good.
Bay Area.
Got it. Perfect. Well, nice. So we'll just give everybody a couple more minutes. Hopefully, everybody will get joined, and then oops, might have you on mute right now, Amy.
What was that, Jill?
Oh, sorry, you were just on mute there for a little bit.
Yeah,
While
I
you were thinking.
unfortunately I have very small office mates in my home office, and so
Do they have four
11
legs
months.
or two?
Well, some of each, but the noisy ones are the two-legged ones, actually.
Okay,
And so just trying to keep that quiet
that's
until
fun.
they relocate.
How old are they?
11 months,
Oh, you have twins?
I do, and
Holy
two bigger
moly!
kids. But
Holy
yeah, the
moly! How old are the
twins is a
older
little
ones?
much. Um, 10 and 8.
So sort of helpful.
Yeah, yeah, they are.
Okay.
They
And then
are.
twins. Yeah. It's a lot
Yeah,
of work, isn't it?
it is a lot.
Is it getting any easier?
I don't know how to answer that because it just goes to a new phase of now they're crawling
Yeah.
and they're threatening to walk, and they're definitely loud. Like they're learning
Yeah.
how to use their voices to get
Yeah.
attention.
Sure.
So it just moves to a new phase, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, boys,
Still not
girls, or
sleeping through the
some of
night.
each? No.
Two girls. So I've got a 10-year-old boy, 8-year-old girl, and then twin girls.
Okay. Very fun. And are
Yeah.
they identical or fraternal?
Fraternal.
Okay. How cool.
Fraternal. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I
hopefully
guess.
every day gets easier.
Yep. Yep. It's never a dull moment, that's for
I
sure.
can imagine. I'm impressed. Yeah, that you're trying to continue to do all the things that you're doing. So it looks like
Yeah. What
Charlie.
about you? Do you have kids?
I do. I've got one that's a freshman in college. So yeah, we're definitely on the other side of that. And
Oh,
then one
yeah.
that's almost 16, two boys. So, but I come
Okay.
from, yeah, I've got identical twin brothers. So
Oh, really?
my sister was 5, I was 2.5, and then my brothers came along. So I empathize with what that must have been like. Yeah, a
Four under
lot.
five sounds like a
4 under age
mess.
5. That's what I say. Yeah,
Wow.
my mom doesn't really recall any of it. So when you ask her about it, she's like, "Oh, it was really quite easy." And it's like, I think you just forgot all of that.
Yeah, I think that's
Just
nature at work, forcing her to forget.
exactly. So, well, it
Yeah.
looks like Charlie has joined as well. Charlie, can you hear us? Okay. Well, I can see that he's on, but I am not hearing him yet. Well, we'll give everybody a couple minutes, and
Okay.
then I will.
I'm going to multitask for a minute. If you're okay with that, I'll just
Yeah, go ahead.
excuse me.
Yep, of
Yeah,
course.
these are the four-legged guys
That's cute.
getting in the meeting.
Yeah, well, they need some attention too. Okay, for everybody, those of you that can hear me, I know my colleague Juliet is trying to invite you. It says to be invited on stage. In order to make this roundtable as interactive as possible, we've kept it very small to just 10 folks. And so I'd like for folks to come on stage or accept that invite when we do send that out so that everybody can see one another and we can have a more interactive dialogue. Just a minute for folks to come on. There you go. Hello. Good afternoon or good morning. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you, Jill?
Doing well, thanks. Nice to see you again. All right, a couple folks are just joining and coming online. I know we've got about 6 on the call so far. Looks like,
I'll stay as long as I can, Jill.
okay, great,
My
super.
day is really done.
Understand,
Taken
yeah.
away from me, so.
Okay, well, this is our first ESG roundtable. So as you guys probably remember from the invite, we set up 4 different sessions and we kept them to about 10 or 12 people each. So hopefully most people can join, but really the intent is just to start to have more dialogue and discussion. So I do have some slides to share and I'll do that here momentarily as soon as we get started. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, super. Well, thank you again. Appreciate you guys both joining or everybody else that's on the call that we aren't able to see. Really excited to get these roundtables started. This is our first one. As I mentioned, we have a couple more this week as well, some in early November. But the whole idea for these ESG roundtables came about because I was working with our board to start to create a more formal ESG strategy for Alvia. So understanding that the market's moving very quickly and all of our clients, both GPs and LPs, are needing to respond. We really wanted to create a roundtable so that you all could start to share ideas, learn from one another, share best practices, and then we are also happy to share what we're seeing from our clients' perspective. So again, this is very much an inaugural session. We hope to have many more to come. So I appreciate any feedback along the way as we work to make this something meaningful for all of you. So quick introductions. Again, just want to go through kind of quickly name, firm name, location, and role. So I can start us off just as an example, and then I'll go ahead and call on folks from there. So my name is Jill Montera. I'm with Altvia. We are based in Colorado. I'm actually in Broomfield, Colorado, which is halfway between Denver and Boulder. And I lead our strategic initiatives for Altvia. And so I do lots of different projects, including this project around ESG. So Amy, I can go ahead and call on you, please.
There, I think I got my mic toggled on.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay,
I can.
great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jill. My name is Amy Richards, and I'm with Autotech Ventures. We are headquartered in Menlo Park, California. And I head marketing, which means looking after the Autotech brand, but also consulting for our portfolio companies on their marketing strategies. And
Okay,
ESG is something that I'm working on for us, and so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great, super. Okay. Noel, how about for you?
Hi, it's Noel Kolowanet with Equilibrium Capital, which is headquartered in Portland, Oregon, dually in San Francisco, although I broadcast from Denver, where I live now. I've been living here for a couple of years. And Equilibrium is an investment management company that is rooted in sustainability. Our one tagline is we develop and offer and manage institutional strategies in sustainability-driven real assets. Long sentence, I won't unpack it, but suffice it to say that we invest in in physical assets on behalf of pension funds and endowments and sovereign wealth funds and so on. The one thing that we've been a client of VIA for a while. One thing that I should say is that we don't self-describe equilibrium work with ESG terms. A lot of people ask us about that. Nor do we describe ourselves as impact investing. In many instances, a lot of our institutions, our investment partners, put us in the bucket, put us in the impact investing. We teach classes in impact investing, but we are self-described as sustainability driven, which is different. And not trying to be body, that's just how we are. We began the company 12 years ago under that the theme that really, more than a theme, is a principle of how we do business and how we invest in what we people to do. We'll measure a lot of stuff and share a lot of stuff that we measure by way of sustainability features and characteristics. And can share more about that in due course.
Okay, super. Well, thank you, Sol. That's great. And it looks like we've got a couple others. We've got, looks like Charlie. Thanks for joining. Do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, Charlie Orr with Summit Park, a North Carolina based private equity firm focused on the lower middle market. I've been a alt VIA client for, a couple of years now.
2 years,
Yeah, and really just kicking off our ESG initiatives here. So
great. Super.
Appreciate you setting this up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks everybody for joining. I think that's everybody on the call. And again, like I said, our inaugural session. So good to know if we want group sizes of a roughly 10, we ought to maybe extend the invite and make sure maybe more like 20 or 25 show up so we can get a good dialogue. So, generally just 3 requests as we get started. So transparency, vulnerability, and confidentiality. When I was doing the research for this project earlier this summer, this request to have a roundtable continued to come up. So as I was interviewing clients and talking to them about where they are in their ESG evolution, everybody said, do you think you could set up a roundtable? I'd like to learn from my colleagues. So again, just asking for a few things there with transparency. So the more we can share, the more we will be able to learn from one another, ideas, suggestions, best practices. The second piece is vulnerability. I will say that after talking to many of our clients, everybody is trying to figure this out, and lots of people are not sure what to do next. And so know that wherever you are in this evolution, you are not alone. But we're really wanting to help people share and learn, share things, share what works, but also share what didn't work. I think all of us are trying some different things as we're trying to work in this space. And then the last piece is just confidentiality. So if people do share things today, we want to be respectful of that and be confidential with the information that is shared so that, again, we don't blast that out to the entire world. So in general for today, a couple things I want to go through. So we asked for folks to fill out a survey when they registered for the webinar. And so I'll share with you some of the results of that survey. Then I also will share some of the research that I did, and it was what I presented to our board. And so happy to share there. We've got some best practices for frameworks as well as different tools and standards that are existing in the marketplace. And so I want to talk you through those. And then I've got a couple questions for dialogue with the group. And then again, we'll finish up with just some high level concepts for our next session. So anything folks want to add or any questions you'd like to ask before we get started?
Yeah, Jill, I just mentioned I'm squeezed for time today, just unexpectedly. So I'll have 15 minutes. So at about 12:30 West Coast or 1:30 East Mountain, I'll disappear.
Okay, super. Okay, thank you, Noel. I appreciate that. All right, so let's start out with just the survey. So again, one of the first questions we asked is, how would you rate your firm's adoption on ESG principles? So you can see there, the first group was blue. So 15% of you have a comprehensive ESG strategy. So again, a pretty small fraction of folks. The second number is the yellow. So roughly 15% have priorities, meaning that maybe you've started to establish priorities and made some progress, but nothing too formal with a comprehensive strategy. And then perhaps the bigger chunk of the pie is the combination of both the red and the green. So 54% of you either haven't started at all or just in very early discussion. So again, I just wanted to highlight this. It was interesting for us to see this. And again, I know folks are really trying to figure out where they want to go and what they need to do. And at times it's a little bit overwhelming. The second question that we asked is, what topics are of interest to you? And we highlighted policies, practices, as well as metrics. And I'd say for the most part, people chose sort of all three, or if they didn't choose all three, they just focused on the metrics piece. So I'm going to highlight this a little bit later as one of our key findings, but I'd say, it's been interesting to watch the evolution of our clients, both the GPs and LPs, but I'd say policies is a really logical place. Most people start out with a policy, and to be honest, as I've talked to a lot of clients, they would rip off a policy that another GP wrote, and then maybe make some small tweaks, post it on their website, and that would be sort of their first step from an ESG perspective. The key, I'd say, though, is really in the practices and metrics. And so, I think a lot of our clients, as I talk to them, they would start with policies and then immediately jump to metrics. But there was a huge gap in the middle, which is what I consider to be the practices, which is, okay, great that we have a policy and we're measuring it, but if we don't change anything about how we do business, nothing will actually ever change. And so I thought that was a really interesting piece. I think it's a natural progression, but I want to encourage folks to really think hard about some of the practices to make sure that you all are starting to incorporate some of these things as you think about your holistic ESG strategy. So I'll pause there for a second. Any initial thoughts based on those three items? I think of them really like a three-legged stool. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. The next question I asked is just, what questions do you have around ESG? And I started to put buckets around these. You can see a lot of them was definitely like, how do you collect all the data from the portfolio companies? Certainly a whole bunch of questions around metrics of what do we track? How do we track them? What does that look like? The third bucket was around investment evaluation. So how do you put ESG principles in place when you're evaluating potential portfolio companies to invest in? Fourth was really around the policy piece and how that looks different both from the US as well as EU regulations. And then the last one is around certification. So again, I share these with you just to know that, perhaps these will be some of the topics of our future sessions, but would love to hear from you both during this session as well as after if there are additional questions or topics that are of interest, just to make sure that we're making this meaningful for the participants. And then the last piece is just really what folks asked, requested takeaways. So we asked a question of what would you like to get out of this with your peers? And so you can see a lot of it is really focused on just learning from one another, getting advice from one another, hearing what other people are doing. So we'll try to make that as much the norm as we start to share more information. So any questions or comments based on what you saw there on some of the survey information?
No, sounds good.
Okay, good. All right, so the next piece I'm going to share is a little bit about the research. And again, this is some of the presentation that I gave to the board, and I'd love to hear from you guys on this as well. But when I looked holistically at the market and talked to, like I said, I interviewed many of our clients. I also talked to many of the providers in this space, trying to distill what are the key frameworks, standards, and tools that people are using in this space. And so I'm going to go through and highlight a couple of these. But before I do, are any of you using any of these framework, standards, and tools, or have any of you researched some of these?
Yeah, I've definitely researched some of these, though not all of them.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Amy. How about, Charlie or Noel? And how about for either of you?
I think we're using PRI.
Okay, good.
Trying to think what else. That's it. That's top of mind.
Okay, good. And Noel, anything for you guys?
I'll go on the ILPA we live with, right? That's actually part of, we've embedded part of our compliance protocol.
Okay,
SDG, that's a guideline. People ask us all the time, how many goals are you meeting? Whether it's 17 or 189 sub goals. PRI, we were a signature and we dropped, and we come back at once a year to ask ourselves, do we want to be part of PRI again? We have not found it. When we dropped, and it's been a bit of an albatross, because when we drop, particularly European institutions or LPs have challenged that. Why did you drop? We were very honest. We didn't find it particularly useful.
Interesting.
Much more too high level and way too much paperwork for its own good. At least we're small firm, 40 people. SASB, one of our board directors is Janine Willock, who's the CEO of SASB. So we are
Great.
SASB, like
Okay.
always SASB.
Good.
TCFD is a guideline umbrella mechanism we follow. I would add two other things that we spend a lot of time with. One we spend a little time with, which is GRESB. GRESB has two parts: GRESB for real estate, and then the attempt to resuscitate GRESB infrastructure, which has been an interesting exercise. And then I'm trying to think what other standards we look at. We're a B Corp.
Okay, great.
And
Super.
B Corp has its own set of rules. It's really a disclosure requirement. You fill out the form every 2 years, and it follows GIN, which is Global Impact Investing Network's GIRS standard, and it's more about disclosing what our practices are. It's an underlying tone of our practices really around transparency and and also our practices in terms of board governance.
Okay.
Big deal on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the last bit on tools on the far right, we haven't been particularly good at using other people's tools. We of course look at all these for data, but we have not found their ESG tools, so to speak, to be particularly useful. I mean, it's too high level in some instances, and in other instances, it's very geared towards public security.
Yeah.
We're in a private asset, right?
Sure.
And so in the private asset, we end up getting more queried about what are we doing against IMM, Impact Money Multiplier, CFTG, and they've been sponsoring that. So tools is actually an interesting question. What tools are in fact useful?
Good.
We are about to deploy, it's been in design and installation work, data system that comes out of IHS Markit,
Sure.
the big data company. And they have a battery of tools because they deal with 4,000 managers around the world, something like that.
Yeah.
And they have a set of menu of tools that are ESG related, as they call it. And at the risk of sounding haughty, I don't mean to, since we don't follow ESG in that sense.
Yeah.
We look at the tools. We haven't adopted any of those tools or reporting tools or measurement tools. We kind of measure our stuff anyway.
Yeah.
It's really much more to us about data management and data manipulation.
The
reporting stuff will come eventually.
Gotcha.
So, gosh, more than you guys wanted, but
no, it's helpful.
That's a suite that we get involved in.
Yeah, no, I level in a bunch of the other tools with IHS. Yeah, really comprehensive, expensive, but also very comprehensive tools. Good. Well, would it be helpful, I guess, Charlie and Amy, I can go through a little bit more of these based on some of the research, if it'd be helpful to hear about, especially like you said with ILPA or maybe SASB. Would it be helpful if I cover some of those just to give you some additional background?
I think that would be great. I mean, I've researched, PRI and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but I'm not familiar deeply with the others. And Noel, it sounds like you're a wealth of information, which is great. So sure, I'd be happy to hear more. Are you okay with that, Charlie?
Yeah, that works.
Charlie, wasn't it?
Okay.
Okay.
And Charlie, any specific areas you want me to especially highlight?
No, I'm just listening at this point.
Okay. And again, I'm happy to share all this after the fact. Also happy to have some side conversations. So I'd say, I'll start off with kind of the left side with the framework. So, starting off with UNPRI, kind of like Noel said, that is the biggie in the industry. So I think they're up to now 7,000 signatories around the world. And when I talk to our clients, especially those that are not here in the United States, that is the primary tool or signatory that they have become a part of. It's expensive, and I think, Noel, you mentioned this. I think at a high level, like you said, what they're after is a good. They have a good strategy, and I appreciate the concepts of what they're putting out. But I relate that back a little bit to ILPA, which is the third one. So a much smaller organization. I believe it's only 180 signatories, majority of those being here in the United States. What I really like about ILPA, and I can send you the links, is that ILPA gives you very practical things and almost like a toolkit or a tool belt of how do you start implementing this stuff. So whereas I felt like UNPRI was definitely much more holistic and strategic, ILPA gives you very specific tools. Like if these are the things you want to start to focus on, here are some examples, here are some tools to use. And so again, very actionable as a place to start. So we do have clients that are signatories for both. UNPRI, probably more UNPRI than ILPA, but I think both are really good for just different purposes. And then, as Noel mentioned, the UN SDGs. I think depending on what it is that you're after, the SDGs are a really interesting piece, but you definitely have to be, I'd say more on the impact investing side. I think it's very much a relevant piece to look at, like Noel said, the 17 SDGs that are out there, whether that's clean water or what have you, access to food. There's some really interesting pieces, but again, maybe not relevant to every single private equity firm. So again, a good overarching tool and reference guide, but I would probably focus more on UNPRI as well as ILPA for specific frameworks to leverage. On the standards side, it kind of just depends. I'd say SASB is definitely the leader. So SASB again is sort of the cousin to FASB from an accounting perspective. And what they have done, which is pretty interesting, is gone through 77 industries and said, if this is the industry that you operate in, here are the exact metrics that you should be tracking. And they go through and actually define at a very detailed level, almost to an excruciating level, what the metrics are, how you would measure, so that if we were both measuring the same thing, we would have an apples to apples comparison. So incredibly thorough. I'd say the issue as I talk to clients who are using SASB is just feeling a bit overwhelmed. If you are making investments into companies that cross the spectrum in terms of sectors, it becomes a little trickier to compare your entire portfolio because you're measuring a whole different set of metrics versus from a financial perspective, you're probably measuring 5 to 6 key financial metrics. And SASB is going to look a little bit different when it comes to the impact side. But again, a really powerful tool and a great place to start. Even if you don't choose every single metric related to the industry, you could choose just a handful that you think are relevant. TCFD more specifically focused on the climate side. So again, depending on the type of portfolio companies or where you're making your investments, TCFD is going to be more pertinent for those that have climate, more on the E side, I would say. TCFD definitely very pertinent and widely used across Europe from what all the clients that I talk to, but still a really powerful tool as something you ought to consider. So any questions based on just going through the frameworks and standards so far? Is that helpful information as I'm sharing?
Yeah, definitely helpful for me.
Okay, good. Great. Charlie, how about for you? Anything that would be helpful to go more in depth on?
No, that was good. That was good. I was just taking some notes.
Okay, great. Like I said, I'm happy to share this, and I've got a whole lot more than just this visual, so we could have some offline conversations if you guys want to as well. So the last piece is the tools, and I'm sure you guys are like we are. You get at least an email a day with something about some tool, webinar, something related to ESG, right? The subject line of ESG is showing up in my inbox multiple times a day. I really zeroed on kind of 3 tools that I thought are doing what I consider to be kind of the best at trying to aggregate all this information and put it into something that's usable. So for Preqin, what Preqin did is said, okay, we're going to try to distill this world of all these metrics. And they zeroed in on 37 different metrics, and they leveraged ILPA, UNPRI, and SASB. And in their mind, took kind of the best of the best from all 3 of those tools and integrated it into their software tool. And so it's a relatively new tool just out this year. I've seen a few demos, and we are actually in the process of talking to them as well about data integrations directly into our product. But at a high level, it is really interesting. They are basically grading firms, funds and companies. So everything in your world, right? So they're looking at you across the board. So how you run your businesses, how you run your private equity shops, how you make investments into the companies, and then how the funds actually perform. So again, a really powerful tool that's probably at the top of my list. MSCI, also a very strong one. That's going to be definitely though more geared on the institutional investor side or just LP side. So MSCI is going through and doing a fund rating for every fund and looking at the ESG indices. So again, pretty powerful tool, but not maybe pertinent for the work that you guys are doing. And then the last one is Dun & Bradstreet, and that's also a relatively new tool. But what they do is go through and assign an ESG risk rating for roughly 6,000 public companies and 3 million privately held companies. So again, it could be an interesting tool as you guys are trying to evaluate companies to invest into. It would be one metric that you could leverage as you're going through that evaluation process to see where they might grade from an ESG perspective. The questions about some of that I covered. I know that's probably the meatiest part of our conversation with the research.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. You've definitely given me a little more direction of other things that I need to research to help build out our strategy.
Good. I'd say the thing I learned, Amy, in general, and I think you're probably in this spot, is that a lot of times with this, because it is so new, people just get overwhelmed with the quantity of information. And the message I heard after interviewing our clients who are on the investor side is just start. You don't have to boil the ocean. It does not have to be perfect. Anything is better than doing nothing at all. So again, just kind of words of advice that I heard from people, or even people that had that sophisticated strategy. They didn't start out like that. They just started building incrementally.
Yeah. And I think we are. And I think, there are just still a lot of open questions around what is the value of it, and what are the right paths to take to make sure that we receive that value. Because things seem kind of fragmented at the moment and kind of scattered, and everybody's, doing their own thing, so to speak. And so I think, those are still open questions for us as we explore.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess what for your LP base, Amy, are you guys primarily US based investors, or do you find you've got folks around the world?
We are primarily US based investors, we do have folks from around the world. So I shouldn't say that. We do have folks from around the world, and we do make investments from around the world. We're early stage, and we're focused on the intersection of ground transportation and technology. And so by definition, many of our portfolio companies, if not almost all, just inherently aligned to ESG, whether they're trying to or not. And so, for us, it's about figuring out how to best leverage that and do it in a credible way.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too. You could obviously pick apart the ESG piece. So sometimes, I'd say E was probably the place people started, especially our European counterparts. That's where they primarily focused. It was really about the environment. I would say with sort of the work of the last year on the diversity and inclusion front, and ILPA does a really good job with tools on that front as well. That was a piece of advice I heard from multiple investors, which is if you can't figure out what to measure on the E side, at least focus on the S and the G side, because you can measure diversity in terms of the operating companies, of ownership and employees, as well as boards of directors. And that is one area where it's pretty universal across the companies rather than different metrics that might be more on the E side.
Right. Okay, that's great. That's good advice.
Charlie, how about for you? Any specific thoughts around some of these tools or where you guys are?
Not necessarily. Again, I think we're early, and this is stemmed from just LP-based feedback. We've actually just gone the direction to outsource at least the policy. To at least get the ball rolling, and then we'll kind of move into metrics and more performance, specific details of the policy. But we're leaning on our third-party provider to really write out the policy and more importantly, draw the materials. And honestly, it's going to be pretty bare bones from the start. But again, it's going to be an iterative process, and we'll, build it out over the next couple of years.
Go through it. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I'd say, what you guys are saying is definitely consistent with what sort of key takeaways I had. And like you said, the investors at the end of the day are going to drive this, and we don't have an option to not change. Is really what I came away with. I think it will be, to your point, Amy, like it will be very strategic and potentially really a tremendous value. But the feedback I got after interviewing many of our LP customers is that they're tired of people, and I liked this quote, well-meaning to well-doing. Lots of people have great intentions and then never do a single thing about it. The investors are tired of what they're calling greenwashing, and they need people to move beyond just policy. And so I'd say in general, the change is valued across the board. It's not just proving that you've got the metrics, but if you've got the stories and the anecdotes to go with it. That was something I heard loudly and clearly after interviewing a lot of our LPs. So I think change is coming whether we like it or not. So anyway,
Jonathan,
a big piece.
Somehow the calendar invite did not make it through to you.
The second piece I would say, and I mentioned this earlier, is it does need to be multifaceted. I think, Charlie, you guys are in a great spot to at least start with the policy. I use the analogy of diet and exercise on this one. So forgive me if this is really basic, but if I came and said, I want to improve my health, I'm going to start eating better, I want to start exercising, that's my policy. And then if every day I get on the scale and weigh myself and nothing ever changes, I can't expect change if I never put anything into practice. So that's how I sort of think about this ESG. And I really think about it as a three-legged stool. But if you just set your intention and then you just start measuring and nothing ever changes through practice, the needle will not move. And so I really want to encourage, as our clients are thinking about this, even if it's just one practice or two practices that folks are starting to do again. And we are also doing this at Albia. We are very much thinking about ESG from an inside out perspective as well, because we need to be living these principles and values as well. We too are a B Corp, like Noel mentioned, with Equilibrium, but we could be doing more on the social and governance side. We still are not a diverse organization, both in terms of gender as well as race and ethnicity. And so we are working very hard to think about that, and inclusive of our board. We're owned by private equity, and now our board is predominantly or solely white men. And so really trying to be thought leader here and lead by example in terms of how we run our businesses or run our business. So I'd say that's the second piece. The last one is that there are lots of firms out there doing ESG. So, Charlie, whether that's the firm you guys hired to help you create policy, there's obviously a ton of folks out there trying to create tools. They're consulting firms and the like. I'd say, leverage these. I think they are very helpful. In general, we don't need to all be reinventing something from scratch, but know that there are lots of good things out there. And I think we could probably leverage even some of the tools that you guys are already using, whether that's Preqin or PitchBook or iLevel or other things that are out there, and leverage some of the ESG tools that they have, because they are quite powerful and headed in the right direction. Any questions about that before we get into a couple other discussion questions? Is this helpful, kind of good stuff to talk through? Would love it, again, any feedback now or after the fact of just, are there things that would be helpful for us to incorporate? I'd love to hear some of that. So, all right. So I think, for the questions for you guys, we've definitely talked about some of the frameworks and standards. So maybe we don't lead with that one, but let's talk about that second question. So what's one thing you've done for your ESG strategy that has worked particularly well? If either of you have some examples or things that you could share.
We created a committee,
Okay.
Which is actually really the one of 3 steps that we've taken.
Okay.
So just an internal committee to lead our efforts here.
Okay. And as you guys think about it, Charlie, I know, you guys are working on the policy side. Are there particular things where you think you might start? Is it, everything from how you're running things with Summit Park internally, or how you look at evaluation of those portfolio companies or the metrics? What do you think is sort of the logical next step for the group?
I mean, really assessments of future investments. We're not going to do any assessments of our current portfolio companies. I think management teams have enough on their plates. So we're not going to push anything there. It's really going to start a diligence of, pre-close during the investment process. And then from there, we'll look to just apply, pretty dynamic metrics that are pretty dependent on the industry, the type of business, and the areas they might run up into that might be obstacles. So again, early, we've got a committee established. We just hired a third-party firm. Once a policy is created, we'll then look to apply said policy to the diligence process.
Okay. And do you feel like you're going to try to hit upon all 3 letters in the acronym, or is there a focus in one particular area?
Internally, we've spoken more of, honestly, less on E. I think, the type of businesses that we invest in outside of a handful, their environmental impact, I think we can make more of an impact in the other 2 areas, quite frankly. And so that's where we wanted to spend our time and at least have some immediate effect of the creation of the committee and the policy.
Gotcha. Okay, good. I guess anything, Amy, how about for you? Anything that you guys have done that's worked particularly well, or that you'd say definitely would recommend?
No, I think we're early enough that I can't really say. So we've begun to develop our policy. I've used some of the frameworks and standards. I'm eager to, after having this conversation, get in and look at SASB, because I think that could help us with part of our discovery has been around, well, what are we supposed to measure and how do we measure it? And that seems really daunting. And so that seems like that could be really useful for us. And, again, I think that for us, it's a function of how do we are fortunate in that, like I said, the majority of our portfolio companies fall under E, S, or G, or across, 2 or more of them. And so sometimes when we talk to prospective investors, they say, no, those numbers are inflated. They don't believe me. And so, I need to find a very credible way to speak about that. So I think, going towards some of the standards and being able to, lay claim that we're aligned to those standards is probably going to be useful. But I'd be curious to hear from anyone who's, either on the call or in your additional roundtables, what has worked well for them.
Yeah, to prove out those metrics. Yeah. No, I think it's going to be an important piece, and even sort of the audit feature, much like we do on the accounting side, to show like we're not fluffing these numbers up and we're not greenwashing them. They really are legitimate.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, like for a lot of our European clients, their quarterly reports highlight this every single time. So there's a ton of anecdotes as well as very specific things. So, like I said, I think that's the balance too of like the metrics and the qualitative piece, because they do want to see the metrics, but they want to see other things that you're doing. Like, for instance, I know when I interviewed a couple clients on the social side, they definitely are looking to track metrics of diversity, but more importantly, they implemented some pretty interesting programs where they were paired with diverse student organizations and doing some really interesting things as an inroad for talent and more of a talent pipeline. So some of those stories became very interesting, I think, to their investor base. It wasn't just the raw numbers themselves, but actually, what are you doing to try to make, in a very esoteric way, the world a better place? Which, I think there's a real possibility with all of the ESG piece that can absolutely be the case. So I do have some, I'll share with both of you guys too. Like I said, for the ILPA, I tried to take the ILPA standards and break them down into a way that was a little bit more digestible. So I've got a couple slides that I'm happy to share with you both if you'd like to see that after the fact.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, I can definitely do that. How about any sort of kind of the converse of that last question? Anything that you've tried that you would warn each other against doing that just absolutely bombed or didn't work at all?
I don't think so. I don't think we've done that much yet.
Okay.
Like I said, we've put ESG content into our outward facing materials, and that seems to be going well. And I think we're just learning about what prospective LPs want to hear, and continuing to adapt our materials as internally we try to figure out how to legitimize our ESG effort.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't think I really have anything noteworthy.
Okay. Which is always good. How about for you, Charlie? Anything that you'd warn people against or something you tried that didn't work very well?
No, I mean, honestly, I don't think we're in the position to give advice at this point.
That's all right.
We're so early. I mean, the thing that we've learned internally is just not to try to take on too much. And I mean, there's so many firms that have such detailed policies that, we wanted to take a step back and just small bites of the elephant, so to speak, and try to just tick away at it.
I think it's a great advice. I mean, do a couple things well rather than doing 10 or 20 things marginally well, I think is definitely a theme that I digested as well as I did a bunch of this research. So
great.
Yeah, helpful. Well, how about, like I said, for kind of next sessions, we are looking to do these at least quarterly, although, if there's valuable content, I'm happy to continue the dialogue and do these more often, but would love to hear from you guys, in terms of the format. And obviously we learned get this being the first one, we need to have more than 12 signups because even with 12 signups, only 25% of the people come. So that will be one change we'll make quickly. But how about ideas for future topics or format? What would you like to see?
Well, one thing I would say, Jill, is that Noel sounded like he was going to be a wealth of information.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of missing him having left early. So I think for me, and that's selfish maybe because people like Charlie and I are just starting out. And so, hearing from folks that are more experienced, I think could be really valuable. I don't think that really answers your question of timing topics or format.
I mean, having guest speakers or like resident experts. I think that's a great idea.
I think I'm good with the format. I think, being able to discuss and hear from others is a good format.
Sure. Okay. How about for you, Charlie? Anything that you'd like to see both on format as well as topics?
No, I mean, I would agree with that. I think having some people a little further along in the process would be helpful. And obviously I'm just thinking from the lens of Summit Park, and we're a North Carolina based firm. So, we're not an impact investing firm. So, we would love to see more of our peers, similar situations, and more importantly, fund size, right? I mean, I think from our LP base, we're still early and the requirements are still relatively young and less, restrictive at this point. I think, we're fundraising right now. And so we're running into, questions, but we're able to simply say that we're assessing, right? We've hired a third party firm, and that's, and not to minimize the importance of the policy, but it's allowed us to kind of punt true creation and metrics and guiding our new investments around policies. And so, again, we're early, and so it's great to hear what, echo what was said earlier, what was shared at the beginning of the call, because I think someone like our guest, I can't remember, Noel, clearly has a ton of experience and background in this. So always great to hear from people like that.
Go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
So Charlie, I agree with everything you said. We're in a very similar boat. And so I think, things like how important it is to have someone else author your policy, as opposed to authoring it yourself, or things like certification. How important is it for us to get certified? We're having those same discussions as we raise also. And you're kind of like exactly what Charlie said, you're kind of kicking the can down the road. Okay, we're working on it. Yeah, we're looking into certification. We're looking into this. And so, I don't know which of those things is going to be the most important,
Sure.
in order to prioritize those. And so I think, some, advice from others, who are further along, I think would be useful. And Noel, you heard his ears were burning, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, no.
In terms of ideas for topics, for you guys, I would leave you with two things to make sure it's on your list of things to think about. One is keep an eye on what the SEC is doing on the climate disclosure rules. I'm not familiar what kind of stuff you invest in or your strategies, but climate disclosure rules is going to become a feature set of SEC disclosure requirements. And this is going to work synchronously with whatever SASB is doing.
Yeah.
And the second thing, which is probably more for fundraising than actual disclosure, but diversity and inclusion is a big deal.
Yeah.
So whatever you got, be prepared to talk about it.
So Noel, can I ask you a question on that? Because we look across our portfolio and we can say the majority of our executives or founders or CEOs are diverse. But when I look at the definition of diverse, it's basically everybody except like Northern European white males, right? So it's so broad. How do I make that credible? Because when I say 96% of our founders and CEOs are diverse, our prospective LPs say that's crazy.
Yeah, there are a couple of two or three things, Amy. One is, of course, the cataloging, right? One is the programmatic approach. That is, how do you recruit? How do you train? It goes into how do you have continuing education until harassment. Okay. That's at least the other part. And the third part, if there's a third part, is this is more my own projection, is having a statement, a philosophy or statement of objective of what you want the firm to do when it comes, and each firm will have its own. What's the objective in diversity and inclusion? Are you, look, it's racial diversity, ethnic diversity, which is a little bit from racial, right? There's gender diversity, et cetera, et cetera. But what is the firm's objective, the firm's aim to that? I mean, having those three elements that you can articulate, it doesn't have to be long.
Okay.
You're going to have a sentence or each.
Okay, how they recruit.
The one that's actually most interesting to me is programmatic. How do you train people? How do you recruit people? What are your instruction sets to your headhunters? Things like that.
Interesting. Okay. Now, if we sit on boards and we encourage our CEOs, to deploy DEI policies and, do the things that you just said, are we allowed then to consider ourselves as part of the governance factor?
Well, you're on the board. If you're on the board, you're part of the governance by definition, right?
Right.
The question is, how much responsibility you take, or how much do you claim from the actions they take or don't take, right?
Right.
And that is not clear. To be honest, that's not clear. It's kind of like, you remember when Walmart sent out their 2,000 suppliers about 12 years ago, that they have to fill out a form and then have to report regularly on their environmental compliance.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big deal. That Walmart did this 12 years ago, 15 years ago. That was a big deal. Almost too early for its time, right? I don't think we're there yet when it comes to diversity and inclusion in terms of where the state of the market or the state of the investment management industry is, but it'll happen eventually. The analogy to that is, if you think about carbon, if you're familiar at all, everyone's talking about scope 1 and scope 2 right now. We won't be in scope 3 eventually, which is everything in your portfolio. Scope 1 is your four walls, Scope 2 is all your business associates and vendors and portfolio companies. Scope 3 is everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, Scope 3 is pretty ambitious. How do you get all the customers of all your portfolio companies or vendors of all your portfolio companies with carbon footprint? Well, who knows when that's going to happen?
Right.
Even Scope 1 is hard. You know, you have dual flushable toilet in your office, right? And you have recycle bin in your cafeteria.
Right.
Scope 1 is easier. Scope 1 is more difficult. Scope 3, who knows?
Yep.
I think diversity and inclusion will follow that type of evolutionary pattern of how your LPs ask. And by the way, American LPs don't ask very much. The European LPs buck the hell out of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We get volumes and volumes of DDQ, and then we get volumes and volumes of yearly updates across these dimensions. So it depends a little bit too on whom you're marketing to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Tidal wave is coming, I think, though. I think 80%, I believe it's
Jill,
more than 80%. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for next topic, I would definitely like to explore if people are doing a diversity and inclusion. What's practice today? Right?
Yeah.
What are people doing today? That's going to be useful. And then what are people's approach to climate change? Because that when they get to the environment and ESG, the E part, when you really distill it down to it, it's what the SEC is going to insist that you report when it comes right down to it, right? And SASB is to influence that.
Yeah, that's great feedback.
Yeah,
great feedback.
Anyway, that's the world I live in.
Well, I appreciate, I know we're running up against the hour. I will follow up with both of you or all three of you and send off, like I said, some of the documents and things that we've created along the way. But, if I can be a resource to any of you based on those conversations or the research that I've done, I would love to do that. Know that we also are aggressively trying to figure out from a product perspective, how do we fold this in from a metrics perspective as well. So starting to build that out right now with a couple of our London-based clients, but would love to have those conversations as you get to that place or move beyond the policy to more of your practices. If there's anything I can do to share what we've learned, I'm more than happy to do that. And again, I want to continue to create content for you all that is meaningful and relevant. So I appreciate that feedback on the topics.
That's great. And so, Jill, will you email us this deck, and then therefore I'll have your email address and we can be in touch?
Absolutely. Okay. Yep. I'll send the deck. I'm going to send the ILPA distillation that I did as well. And then if there are other things that you'd like to hear about or just want to brainstorm together, know that I'm happy to be a resource in that way as well.
Great. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jill.
All right. Thanks to you all. Noel, thanks for your advice as always.
Thank you. Right. Nice meeting you all.
Good luck with the twins and the kids. That's exciting.
Thank you.
Godspeed, right? All right.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.